All right, guys, we are back again with the Pat Stedman podcast, episode 8 with Trina Nuance. Back again with Trina Nuance. This is like this show's killing it. I'm telling you, this show is the last one that we had was really something else.
That was good.
And I'm excited for this one today. So today we're going to be talking about initiating interactions / approaching. I'm being a little bit generic with the initiating because, does a woman initiate an interaction more effectively through actually not approaching, right? So we're going to talk about some of that, whether there's situations where a woman should actually approach or what the analog is, and then talking about rejection and how the opposite sex, how both sexes deal with it. So, because I think, even just like this morning, like a post that I was dealing with was basically, in some ways it was about rejection, or at least I turned it a little bit about rejection. A lot of guys struggle with rejection. They really, really struggle with it. And I guess people in general struggle with it, but no one likes.
Did I see that one?
So, yeah, we can start off with this because I think that there's a dovetail in here. It's a little bit more about like entitlement, but basically a guy was posting an exchange between this guy and a girl he was dating. It sounded as if they were probably somewhere between like it sounded like they were maybe a couple months in. Like, I don't think that they were in a relationship yet, but they were not at like first or second date stage. Somewhere between, like, I would say 1 and 3 months would be my guess based on the exchange. But basically he got her some flowers for Valentine's Day. She, took her on this nice date. So she starts off by being like really, like, oh, thank you. Like, I had such a great time. And then it becomes this thing about like, oh, but why wasn't there a gift? Like, you just got me flowers. Like, really just entitled, obnoxious behavior. Like, you think like only like girls in romance movies actually want flowers. Like, I was expecting a gift. It was just like,
is it a viral like screenshot where she's just going off?
Well, yeah, the guy's like confused. Like, what do you mean? Like, what's
okay?
Yeah, I mean, it went viral, semi-viral. There's levels of virality, but it got about 1,000 something likes. But the thing for me is like, yeah, there's no disagreement here that woman sucked. There's no disagreement about that. But what bothers me a little bit is how these things are always caricaturized, and obviously it's done because it's internet outrage. But they say like women like want guys to do nice things for them. It says man does something nice. Women, oh, like, why didn't you do something? It's just like, and I wanted to say to it, I mean, I had my own response, and this is what we talk about, like the rejection stuff, because my response was about a circumstance that I had with rejection and a woman being kind of cunty. But like, what bothers me about this is like they're saying women ask for this, man does this, women, but it's not women. It was a woman. It wasn't like every woman did this. You know what I mean? Like they're generalizing. I've never dated a woman who did something like that. I'm not saying that maybe at some point or another a woman expected a little bit more. Everyone has, who knows? But I've never seen that kind of overt entitlement. And of course it's out there. Of course it happens. But when we take these sort of the thing about the post for me is that they're saying that this is like women are shaming guys who do nice things. That was what it was saying, that women shame. But I actually think that post shames guys much more than that woman does. Because the post is saying, see, if you do a nice thing for a woman, you're a fucking loser. Like, you just fucking got had, right? Because women don't appreciate it. So you're a loser if you do something nice for a woman. So it's actually the manosphere accounts that are shaming guys for doing nice things for women, not women so much. I mean, I'm not saying you're not gonna have a bad experience. And what I was using with the whole rejection thing is like, I had this experience where I went and approached a group of girls, And it was a bizarre thing. Like one of them started crying. I just went up and said, like, you know, hey, what's going on? You guys look like you're having fun. One girl starts crying. Other one's like, they're like, you're a fucking asshole. You know, one like shoves me. Another one steals my sunglasses. It's like I like stepped into some trap. And I didn't know whether like there's only two things that I could think of that were the case. And it was one was that somehow I had created like a PTSD response in that woman. Like maybe I looked like some guy who sexually assaulted her or I don't know. And her friends were just really, you know, rather than being like, hey, sorry, she's been having some issues, you know, like give her some space, whatever. Or it was some kind of like plan they had to deal with anybody who went and talked to them. And I think, you know, maybe in hindsight, it was more the latter, just because everything was almost too like coordinated, and like the response of some of the women was kind of like, I don't know, it was almost like they were playing a very nasty game. I don't know, but the point is like, I don't care about this. Like, I thought it was funny.
Coordinated almost implies like you felt like you walked into a trap.
Yes. Yeah.
Which might have been the atmosphere of like, oh, we maybe consciously or subconsciously, if any guy approaches us, we're going to punish him for it.
Yeah, exactly. It must have been something like that. But I use it as an example because I approached hundreds of women, like probably close to 1,000 when I was a single guy. I've never had anything like that happen before. Like I've obviously been like, you know, given the cold shoulder. I've been, you know, ignored. I've been told to like, in so many words, have a nice night. You know, we're not talking to you. Whatever, that's fine. But that whole experience, but you know, I could take that and I could turn that into a viral post. Like, this is what modern women are like. That's like, it's not what modern women are like. It was like, it's just like,
and it's good because you're pointing to the fact that even if that anecdote is true, the way the internet like hyperfixates on these micro things, not like they don't happen, but it kind of, it's like an outsized representation that kind of feeds in on everybody's fear of rejection in a way that sucks for guys, like you're saying. And I agree with that because it's like people already struggle with not engaging enough in real life or shooting their shot to like increase the surface area of opportunity or whatever, right? So it's like that's not helping guys.
Yeah, I mean, and it's an issue with the internet in general. I don't want to digress from our main topic, but like it kind of reminds me a little bit about just what happened a few days earlier with the internet going crazy about Ashley St. Clair, you know, having this baby with Elon Musk. And it's like this is it. Now women are just going to be totally they're going after their hypergamy completely now. And like what women are all going to try to be the, you know, the consorts of billionaires, and it's over for like Ashley St. Clair is a notorious whore. Like this is a girl who looks like she has some degree of personality disorder and has a huge reputation of just fucking like people who have been on tour buses with her, people who knew her in college. She fucked like everything that moved. So like, how is this woman like this is not, and she's a single mom already. This is not representative of women. Ashley St. Clair is not paving the way. And honestly, she looks kind of embarrassing. I mean, I'm not saying it was the worst strategy for her as already a single mom to get pregnant with Elon Musk's kids. Like there are dumber things you could do. And
talk about walking into a trap.
Yeah, I mean, in some ways, you could say that she won, but I mean, she's being humiliated. Like he's treating her like she's like trash basically. And okay, like maybe she's gonna get some child support from him, and yeah, it's probably gonna be considerable. But I don't know. I'm like, I don't think a lot of women are looking at Ashley St. Clair's situation right now and saying, yeah, she's got the jackpot. Like her dad is publicly ignoring her. That the father of her children is publicly ignoring her and humiliating her. And she gets to like seek attention online and try to get more child support from him. I mean, I don't know. This kind of stuff, it's like, it's kind of ratchet. And I don't think a lot of women are drawn towards it. I don't know. Am I wrong about that, Trina?
Like, that's total baby daddy, sugar daddy angle, right? I don't know anything about her besides for what you just told me and like little snippets of what I've seen on Twitter. And I remember visuals of the way she was dressed, which I'm not here to like be purist with, like, you know,
Sure,
what you wear, but you know, a certain way that you carry yourself and dress does imply certain things. And I just remember whatever picture I saw was like, well, this is clearly a little bit of a suggestive representation of yourself. And then I saw something about, yeah, like suggesting what you're implying with the whole like trap thing, where she like, as later in life, she's screwed up in these different ways and now she's hit the jackpot or whatever.
I mean, she's a conservative grifter girl. Like, there's a lot of them in that community. I would say that a majority of them are probably to some extent sleeping to the top. I mean, this is like, I don't want to get us too far afield from the topic of conversation, although it is really interesting to observe it.
No, I think it's related because I think one of the things is maybe an anecdote like that blown up can mess with guys' discernment of, oh, are all scenarios where this chick's at the end of her life and you have a lot of money immediate things to reject because that's a liability? That's probably not the lesson. There's probably some way more blatantly obvious things that were, you know, risky to engage with, but are all dynamics of that have that in common with it bad? I don't think so.
Yeah, I mean, and the big concern for me with guys is twofold. I mean, one, it's obviously getting jaded and thinking that a woman who is clearly completely feral and attention seeking, like Ashley. And I think that this is one of the things to keep in mind is that, you know, and it's a balance, right? Because I think if you're an attractive woman, there's no shame in using your looks to get more engagement. Like, look, I know this as a guy in the space. Like, you could have like a attractive girl could literally, and it's actually happened before. Like, it hasn't happened for a few years, but there was a period where I saw some of my tweets basically taken verbatim by some attractive girl account. Blows up, goes a lot further because attractive girls saying it. You know what I mean? Like, people want to like it. You know what I mean? It's just the way it is. It's life. Like, big deal. Get over it. But so I don't think there's anything wrong with an attractive woman using her looks to her advantage. People care about. I mean, it even affects you if you're a guy too, right? So there's no reason to be opposed to it. But there's a certain thing you have to watch for with, like, a woman really uses her looks a lot and tells you whatever she, you know, whatever the current thing is, she tells you what you want to hear. Like, I think, unfortunately, there's probably a really high likelihood that she has zero principles and is totally in it just for the attention and the grift. And she probably slept her way into a position of influence within these organizations. It's not 100%. But I think it's like, you can see it's a pattern, right?
That also brings in a really important point about attention, right? Because we live in work in the online world, and we live in an attention economy now with social media, right? So, and I speak to lots of women who want to start their online presence in some way because of the work I do with coaching programs. And a big struggle for the feminine is the opposite of what you're talking about, which is they want to feel okay with taking up space and shining their light, and getting attention and like getting on camera, not feeling insecure about that, but they don't feel free to do that. And I think this points to a relational thing too, where it's like, you know, just like we said, it's easier for women to go out and like get laid. And that's not, and not as for men have to more like earn it or whatever. Same thing with attention, right? Like, it's easier for a chick to get attention through her looks in this attention economy just by being cute. So where's the discernment in that, right? Where do you recognize like how that's being leveraged to a point where it's not, there's low integrity, I guess to call it, or just, you know, somebody taking up space? Because it also points, I've tweeted something about this before. It's like, if you date somebody attractive, you don't get to decide that they're only attractive to you now.
Right.
Right. So it almost, so then the thing becomes, in a risk situation where you guys are being social together or they're social without you, I think the really important thing is like, how is that attention being used? Just like it might be in social media, right? Is it, because it's not inherently completely evil to get attention.
No.
But Yes.
And it's not even avoidable either. Like if you're attractive,
Keep them trapped in a dungeon.
yeah, exactly. And I mean, and some cultures kind of do that to try to, the whole thing is the intention behind it. Like, I think if you're an attractive woman, like the balance is, I think to some extent how you dress. Like you can dress in a feminine way, but not necessarily in a provocative way. I mean, Ashley was certainly angling herself in provocative angles for a long time. That was kind of known. And also to the extent that you have a guy in your life to really emphasize a lot of that relationship in things, what kind of stuff you're talking about. Because it is like this balance, I think that there's something to be said for female accounts who are talking to the mainstream to just be very conscious about what kind of videos and what kind of like photos they're putting out there. You're always going to have some haters, right? Some people are always going to hate just because if you're attractive, they are going to jump to this conclusion like, oh, you're attractive, so that's why, you're getting engagement. But I can tell you, like, and I've seen it, I've seen it on Twitter. I can tell pretty clearly, like, what female accounts are using their sexuality are really, their posting is predominantly about them getting personal attention, in which accounts just simply have incidental expansion because it just so happens that it's an attractive woman, but it's not the main thing that she's selling with the business. She might almost never post a photo of herself. Like, you know what I mean? It's not versus somebody who's like, if they're trying to show you a product, are they showing like, here's my tits and here's the product? You know what I mean? Like, or like, is it just the product? Like we didn't need the tits. We appreciate them, but we didn't need them. So, I mean, it's that kind of stuff. But I guess this is actually to segue this. So let's talk about like approaching and initiation. So
Okay.
how do women like, because I've worked very, very seldom with female clients, and I don't intend to move into that space. It's just kind of been on a very bespoke basis. And
you're really good at it.
Well,
I'm not sorry to segue again. We always do this, but
thank you. But part of the problem is that, like, well, I don't want to talk about that.
Yeah, like maybe not. We got to avoid segueing.
Yeah, but
okay,
like you have women who, if you're dealing with a guy, you want to meet more women. Okay, well, it's fundamentally about action. I mean, you can have different ways of presenting yourself or marketing yourself, but it's fundamentally about action, like going out and meeting women, right? And you have to go and you have to approach, and there's a way to do this, and we'll talk about that. But I'm curious about with women, how do you get a woman to do that? Because a woman, to some extent, I mean, can a woman go, in your opinion, and approach guys? If she doesn't go and approach a guy, how can she go about doing it? What do you think about this? How does a woman get a guy's attention?
Not to be repetitive, but it goes back to intention again, right? Because for example, we talked about on the last episode, like the hunter horror archetype, right? That I think is far end of a spectrum. But there's also, I don't know if you've posted about this or somebody else I've been exposed to in the online world. What's that analogy of like the old school, like women signaling, like handkerchief drop?
Yeah.
Right? That's a great example. I almost feel like socially with men aren't, these unflinching, even if he's confident, right? He's also human. So, sometimes there can just be a little bit of nerves if you're attracted to somebody around like approaching them, even for the man, even if he's a confident guy. So in terms of facilitating that, I almost feel like there's a delicate, like tasteful set of scenarios where a woman can almost socially drop a handkerchief. Right? Whether that looks like eye contact, green light, or like actually like, oh, hey, blah, 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 and then go back and it's like, oh, you can actually talk to me sort of vibe. But I don't think it's like like you're whatever over here, right? And I've experienced that, and it doesn't like we've talked about, it doesn't set off the dynamic necessarily on a great trajectory. But am I against women, texting first or walking up to the guy or giving him eyes? No, I think that because there's so much confusion and insecurity and doomerism and influence in the world, I think it actually becomes quite helpful sometimes.
Well, yeah, that was one of the things with like, remember back in the day with Facebook where you had like the poke?
Yes. Oh
like
my God, I thought about that in so long.
That was like that.
That was such a great, honestly, that's a great,
Yeah. It was always funny. It was like, this person poked you. You're like, what the fuck? And I think that, it still exists today, like on a virtual standpoint, that a lot of women, they're not going to necessarily even send the first message, although they might, but a lot of times they'll just like something on your profile. So that's basically saying, hey, you're allowed to talk to me. I'm expressing some degree of interest. I love that though. That's such a great example of how it is, with the handkerchief drop, because I think that that's really like, for women, it's about, so if you're a man, the whole thing is like to be fearless and approach, basically be fearless, go after it. But if you're a woman, it's like be fearless and be receptive to it. Be fearless in the sense of opening yourself up to advances.
Yeah.
And I think where a lot of women, and it's interesting to like work with a woman because it's like reverse engineering so much, because I have to think like, okay, well, what do we look for as indicators of interest, right? So how do you send those to guys in general? And a lot of it is really being like smiling more, kind of giving eye contact. And there's an art to doing it, so that you're not going to give eye contact the same way as a guy, right? It's the glance, to sort of look away, but something that's going to signal. Go ahead.
No, and one thing there on the women's side is, ironically, which is not helpful for the men's side, sorry guys, but ironically, when you are more nervous, whether it's just because of your level of insecurity or from whether it's your level of insecurity to self-esteem, or you're just nervous because you're particularly attracted to this person, that can be the person you avoid in that social dynamic situation.
Yes. Yep.
Feel more comfortable looking in the eyes of somebody that you aren't interested in, or talking to them, or even being around them at the social engagement, because you are interested in them. So again, it leans back to like the guy approach being the more reliable thing of it.
What you're describing is something I've had to talk to guys a lot about this, because it's something that you're describing that beginners really mess up, because they're looking for a clean, clear signal to go ahead. But yeah, I would say that most women don't give clean and clear signals, but you can tell the difference, because what'll tend to happen if a woman's interested in you but she's nervous is she'll look at you, but then she'll glance away when you look at her.
Mm-hmm.
And so like, we kind of call it, and then she might glance back while you're still looking at her, and that's like called like a peek back. And so that's an indication that she's just nervous. It's actually, like, I would say in some ways it's a better tell than even if she just gave you eye contact, because she's already kind of being like a little submissive in the interaction. Like, it's like you're going to come into that interaction, if you know how to read it correctly, you come into that interaction feeling like, yeah, this girl likes me. Like, she's already a little bit nervous. And also another thing to look at is that she might not be angling herself towards you, but she's not going to be physically so distant from you. So it's kind of like she's not going to like try to get as far away from you as possible. She's going to still want to be somewhat close because she's interested. She just doesn't want to like.
It feels like it's almost I'm thinking of a personal anecdote. So at one point years ago, me and a guy that were in the same found ourselves in the same friend group, and I was new to that friend group. I'm kind of like a free agent among these different groups in my life, right? Over my entire life, I've been like that.
100%.
And in that group, I was like starting to bond with that group, and me and him were like attracted and interested in each other, and we actually ended up like having a thing, nothing like official or formal, for a long time. And at that point, I wasn't as comfortable with my sense of self, right? And I would in hindsight, in the moment, it wasn't the story I was telling myself, but in hindsight, I was always avoiding those signals. Like we would be with our big group of friends meeting up in our respective areas. And, at the end of the night, we would end up together. But in the party, like it was just very like, I'm not even like showing that I like you. And I really, really liked him. But I would like find my way to like proximity, like go stand up to him next to the whatever. And over time, like, I don't know, over time it got a little bit messy, and it was like I addressed it, and I wasn't as assertive or didn't feel as good kind of with rejection at that point, right? So my whole thing would have been like, oh hey, for him to be like, I like you, this is going in one direction or the other, but not even giving him the signals he needed to know that was safe. So from his perception, it could have just been like, oh, she's just here to hook up with me, and like we're just friends, right? But at the end, when it all fell through and we addressed it, he was like, I didn't even know you liked me. And I was like, what? How do you not know that? I'm hooking up with So, and all of this is to say is like the woman who can avoid any sort of vulnerability, even if vulnerability looks like I'm showing that I like you, period. That can be just a self-protection thing where it's like the fear of rejection is met with the fear of rejection. And if somebody doesn't grow some balls to either signal or assert clarity, then everybody's just going to be perpetuating this fear of rejection. And then the opportunity cost happens.
Yeah, fear of rejection. And I think this is this fear of rejection is such like people talk about it as only almost being in this initial like approach, like go after the girl, express your interest. And yeah, that's obviously the most overt level of rejection. But really, like confronting fear, which is rejection on a certain sense, over and over is something that happens over and over again. It happens after you start seeing each other, and it becomes a question of, are we going to move this further along? Is this going to become like a more, serious committed dynamic, or is it just a fling? When you're in a serious relationship, is this something, are we going the full distance? Are you going to commit your life to me? Then you're together, you want more connection, but you're afraid that person doesn't really want it anymore. There are so many layers to it. And this is one of the things that just to say it, because I don't think it's probably not the initial intent that we had for this conversation, but it's so important because you get this perennial argument from the manosphere, and even like the mainstream for that matter, in their own ways, that a long-term relationship, like a serious relationship, a marriage, is just it's just boring at a certain point, and you just like settle for certain stuff, and you're not going to have that passion, you're not going to have that intimacy anymore. And the reason that things get stale is because people are not facing the next level of rejection and fear. Like there are more layers to pull back, and they become maybe more subtle, but there's more and more to uncover with the other person, more ways that they hold back, and that you have to almost like fight the pull out, and then they challenge things about you, and then you get to another level of intimacy, another level of attraction. So it really is the secret. Like when I think about the 3 things that people need to do to have like good love life, okay, it's like expanding your perspective and awareness of things, right? Because knowledge is power, knowledge protects, and it's operating in good faith, because the more trust that you create in a dynamic, the more you're able to actually have a healthy dynamic. But the other one is confronting fear. And if you're a guy, if you're not confronting fear, then you just can't get there. It's never gonna happen.
Yeah, I really like that point you just made, because I've thought similarly. I don't think people stop fearing rejection even once you're in a committed relationship or marriage or whatever it is. For example, jealousy. I think jealousy at its root is a fear of rejection, because if you're exposed to other options, are you going to reject me to choose one of them, whether I know about it or not? That's a fear of rejection, we could say, right? And then also like within the bond too, gaining weight, losing weight, losing money in your career, or going up in all these different opportunities where the partner could, air quotes, reject you for something that's shifting, where you're challenged to grow through it and bond together or not, right? And I don't think it ever goes away.
Yeah.
People think, our personal relationships with uncertainty is a really big seed to fear of rejection, and not, right? Because there's always a level of unknown, in my opinion, right? Like, even in, I think the reason people like things like like things like security, contracts, marriage, love, certainty, trust, whatever, is because it gives a level of safety through certainty. But if you talk about people and the areas that they're exposed to in life, there's always a domain that you, unless you're being super like micromanaging and neurotic of every inch of exposure they have in their life, then there's always going to be some area for uncertainty.
Yeah.
And people aren't okay with that. And then I think it really suffocates things. And that's where people might want to rebel even more.
Yeah, they're not okay with it, but I mean, that's their whole problem, is they're not okay with it.
Yeah.
I keep hearing like all the stuff like about divorce, rape, or this is going to happen, or this is going to happen. It's like, look, man, like there's just nothing in life that doesn't have risk to it.
Yeah.
Like I'm not saying if you're worth like $10 million and you're marrying a girl who's making $50K a year and she's, 10, 15 years younger than you, yeah, get a prenup. Okay. Like, fair enough. Like, I don't think anybody in their right mind is going to have much of a disagreement with that. But like, I see a lot of these guys who are like making maybe like 10K more than the girl they're with. They're like, I got to get a prenup. It's too risky. Like, you're not going to get the, like, I don't know. Like, what are you protecting? What are you protecting? I don't.
It's all of our fears of inadequacy, right? Whether you measure your inadequacy by money or beauty or like whatever domain that you're deciding to look at through the lens of inadequacy, it's the fear of, oh, I'm going to get rejected because in this lens, somebody could be better than me, whether she's more beautiful than me or he's richer than me or whatever it is. And like you're saying, our relationship with that fear is the most important thing, right? Because can it exist? Can we be scared that somebody is better than us in some way? For sure. But does that have to control what we do about it? Because there isn't a risk-free choice there. It's suffocate all their exposure to people who could be better than you in that way, or the risk of nuking the trust that you have and the faith you have in that connection and things happening the way they're meant to happen. And fear is such a liar.
It is. It's that's the famous Dune quote, right? Fear is the mind killer. Like it's. I don't think that people have a proper risk association with it, especially when you get into like, what is life all about? What is? Anybody whose way of operating is about pain avoidance, I think just is always going to have a bad life and a difficult life, because life is constant. I don't want to say like every given moment, but it's pain. There's tons of pain involved in life. You have to be able to breathe through it and move through it. And I understand to some extent, I'm understanding this more and more, because, we always have our own experience, how we view things. And, I guess maybe I am built different in a certain sense that to me, it's really like I could lose it all and, I know I'll rebuild.
I feel the same.
Like,
and there's almost like an arrance to that.
Yeah, there is almost an arrogance, and maybe to some extent a little bit of a delusional arrogance. Like,
yeah.
I think that I'm becoming more, because I certainly, I've taken some losses, right? I've certainly become a little bit more, moved a little bit more on the side of like, I don't want to necessarily say caution, but prudence.
Yeah, you mentioned that that's important to you after this whole debacle of you going to prison.
Yeah, I think a lot more about sort of avoiding catastrophic loss.
Right. But you also don't regret the experience.
Absolutely not.
Now we're in tricky territory where it's like the baseline of you feel this way, right? Like, oh, I'm going to be fine no matter what, even if I lost everything. I feel the same. And I think that baseline is because we've been exposed to risk in ways where, oh my gosh, that would shut somebody down from ever trying again in that domain of life. But because we've, stacked and some certain degree of experience to where losing it all really didn't, it wasn't over. You know, you're within, what does that mean? I'm thinking of the meme of like within the it's so over, I found within me an invincible, we're so back, right?
Yeah.
Like it's true. And I think that even ties all the way back to like when we go to like approach anxiety and rejection. It's like the guy who's approached thousands of women like you, or another one, or and he's watched and experienced himself be okay over and over and over, even in light of rejection. And his sense of self and his sense of self-worth is separate from that feedback, without being blind to what that feedback might be, right? Because you also want to repeat a pattern where you keep getting rejected because, you know, you're obese, and like that's probably something you should fix, right? But those things are separate. Your sense of self and your sense of self-worth, and you being exposed to where your baseline tolerance of that risk and that fear is just, oh, this is normal. Like if somebody rejects me, it doesn't say anything bad about me. That's been good experiences of mine being on the, and I've been rejected, right? On the rejecting side. I've also turned down men in a, you know, in a way that I've gotten explicit positive feedback for, because it's like the vibe or the explicit words or both are very, yo, you're a catch, shoot or shoot. I'm not her, but like you're gonna find her. I just don't feel that way about this.
Yeah.
But like kudos or whatever I said. And they've been like, oh wow, thanks. That was like the nicest rejection I've got. And it's like, doesn't need to mess with anybody's sense of self, because if everybody can relate to the idea of there's nothing wrong with somebody, but you just don't feel that way about them.
And if everybody was that honest, we wouldn't have that big of an issue with rejection. The issue is that people feel guilty about doing the rejection, so they hold back, right? Or they let the other person commit more, invest more than they want, and then they feel bad about telling them that they won't do it, so they they ghost, or they make some kind of excuse, or and sometimes if they've done that long enough, then they flip the other direction, and they might be really like rude as a result, because they've repressed so many feelings. And you can see it's just like, look, just be honest. Just, I mean, I'm not saying that you always have to be like, sometimes there's a very easy, delicate way to get out without having to explain everything. You know what I mean? But I think especially when somebody comes up to you in person, like I don't know about you, but like I get a million DMs every day, and now mostly they're all like porn and crypto scams. So like, I mean, but for a long period, for a long period of time, it's like, hey boss, hey boss, hey boss, hey boss, hey boss. You know, it's like, man, what the fuck is this, Elon?
Trina, have you learned? Have you found out how to scale your coaching offer to $5 billion? Would you like a loom? Oh my God.
Yeah. So there's that, right? I was getting these DMs like, we're gonna give to $1 million, and then like it kept going up. Like there'd be like a different girl avatar that's like, now it's like 3.2 million, and I'm like, I checked both of the bios. It's the same company. I'm like, so like I didn't respond. So 24 hours later, like you just bumped it by 2 million. Like, but I was getting all this stuff, and then one guy was actually like, he picked out certain positive things about what I was doing. He didn't lead initially to a pitch, and I wasn't interested in his services. I wasn't looking for that stuff right now. But I told him, I said, look, man, like you're actually operating in like good faith. You're acting like a human being, and like it's going to reward you at some point. You know what I mean? Like I don't open any of these things or respond to any of them, but I responded to you. I wanted to tell you that. And you know, I think that stuff that makes a big difference. Like when you're starting off a business, it's the same thing when it comes to dating. Like we can do better with rejection, but every new level requires rejection. And I have to remind myself about this, that I was really a different person. Like I'm saying I'm like, oh, I'm built different, but actually I built myself different, because when I was 20, I was so like in prior, right? I was so absolutely neurotic and afraid. Like I remember going to like a party thinking everybody was looking at me when I was first trying to go out and be more social, thinking everybody was looking at me. Everyone thought I was a loser. I would have like basically spiraling inability to basically control my mind. I'd have to like leave. Like I'd be writing things to myself to try to just like calm my mind, like super high levels of social anxiety. And I just kept pushing through it. I kept pushing through it until eventually at a certain point, and I don't know exactly when, if there was a specific catalyst moment. But at a certain point, I began to associate the feeling of doing something scary, doing something where I'm going to look stupid, as being pivotal to getting to the next level of my life. And so it's like I know that it's going to be uncomfortable. Like I just started doing martial arts, right?
Cool.
Like, yeah, I really after being in prison, I'm like, yeah, I gotta learn how to do this. Like I navigated prison through immense amounts of charm and like social awareness, but that was always like thank God I like was 10 out of 10 on that because otherwise I'm sure I would have gotten into
You got your ass kicked.
Yeah, I'm sure it would have happened. Instead, I was able to maneuver through the ladder, and I don't want to lose that gift. I think
you're probably an enjoyable experience for them to have around in prison.
No, to be honest, like I was almost like I became like the golden child. So like nobody wanted anything to happen to me because I was this sort of like pure of heart individual. They're like, we're not letting anything happen to J6. Like we're good. There was like mutual agreement. Everybody liked me, and anybody who had any issue with me was on the outs. But that took that was. I'm very pleased with the fact that I was able to do that. But knowing how to fight would have been nice. It would have been nice, and I think it's something that as a man you really should know how to do. It's overdue anyway. But the bottom line is, I'm about to go down that path, and I'm thinking to myself like, I don't want to do this. like I'm gonna be ridiculous. I'm gonna suck. I'm gonna be a beginner, and it's just like it's in my mind, and it's like,
really, I love that because intellectually you're very normalized the idea of rejection from all the shots you've taken there, and then the physical version of it is going to be like, wow, you're risking getting punched in the face, which is what rejection feels like to a lot of people.
Yeah.
Right, but you know that you're going to form as you go on this journey, and if you stick with it, that you can get punched in the face and you can still be okay.
That's right.
Right, and like same thing. You just made the place you started at was you made a reference to DM outreach and cold outbound, right? And as you are familiar with, and I am too, like sales, marketing, blah blah. There's so many dating analogies to make, and I always make them. And it's same thing. Like as a salesperson, you talk to hundreds of people. If you get a no, your baseline for getting a no is really normal. But then to make a dating parallel, it's like, there's two ways of it. You can be like, oh, fuck that guy. He's indecisive or fearful or brokey or whatever the issue is. Or you can explore what was the reason for the no. Is it something that is like the offer can improve on? Or is it something with the avatar that they struggle with that we can help facilitate? Or is it whatever it is? Just like even when you rejected, air quotes, that guy with the great outbound, it was just like, hey, you're doing something right. But it's just, I don't need that. Right. So I think that's the same thing with like rejection and approaching, because if, say, for example, I got rejected. And actually, this is a good example for guys here about women too. I'm gonna start there. The reason that we think of to reject you, say a woman is like, I only date guys who are at least 6'3".
Yeah.
Then she can be like, oh, I'm rejecting this guy because he's 5'6". And then she, fast forward 5, and then she dates and then she ends up marrying some guy short. The real, there can be a gap between what we think is the reason we're rejecting somebody and the real reason we're rejecting somebody, but we're just looking to give a reason, right? Maybe we don't have the level of awareness or sophistication or emotional maturity or whatever it is.
Oh, okay. All right. You're still there. Because you froze for a second. I'm like, no.
Oh, did I freeze?
Not right. No, you're good. You're good. You're back. I was just like, no, not right now. Like, this
where did you lose me?
No, you were saying that there's a reason that they give a reason.
So I think sometimes people's reason can be legit, and sometimes people's reason can be just something they clawed at the air for to give it, right? Which means like, oh, if a guy approaches me at a bar, it's very normal for women to be like, oh, you're weird. But somebody that they're actually attracted to can come up in the exact same way, and they cannot label that as weird just because they also are attracted to them. Right. Mm-hmm. And all this is to say is the same woman is like, oh, it's a height thing is the reason I rejected him. But maybe it wasn't really a height thing, because maybe she ends up being attracted to somebody who was shorter than him later down the line. And I'm saying that's pretty fickle. I think that can happen also, dare I say, on the guy's side, right? This is the reason that I'm rejecting her, where it's like, maybe it's actually holding a mirror up to something within yourself that's kind of triggered or something. I think it can happen for both. So all this is to say is your sense of self and the feedback that you take in or don't take in, there needs to be, there needs to be a separate element of like, these are my qualities. This is my sense of self. This is the responses that I can evoke from people for these certain qualities. And that is separate from other people's reasons for rejecting or accepting me. And in those reasons, and this isn't completely just a logical thing. Sometimes it's really just a vibe. And I describe everything as a vibe, but it really is just a vibe. Like sometimes you are objectively attractive and I'm not attracted to you. You check all the boxes, but we just have less than zero chemistry, right? Or whatever it is. And I just don't think that, I think that goes back to the relationship with uncertainty. You can't, no matter whether somebody gives you the real reason they rejected you or they aren't in touch with that real reason and they're just giving you one that they think is the reason, no matter what it is, there needs to be a level of like internal certainty that you're anchored in for that to not like drag you down.
Okay. So here's a question. So how much do you think looks really play in, especially like I want you to hit like all three of the big like looks categories. So like the physique, the face, and the height. How much do these things play in to the decisions women make when it comes to guys? Both, and you can break that down both in terms of short term and long term.
Oh shit.
That's too much.
Wow, that's a loaded question. I think that, first of all, women are way more critical of the way a man looks remotely. I don't know how to say. Like, if we're criticizing, this is something actually Layla, we reference.
You say remotely, what do you mean?
I mean, like, if I'm on, actually, one of the other, so if I'm looking at pictures of a guy online and I've never met him in person, it definitely, there's a gap there between how attractive I can find him in person.
Yeah. Okay. Wait. There's a gap. So, okay. So if you don't find him attractive online, then you're not.
All women experience this, by the way. Like if you know somebody in person and you think they're cute because you've known them and then you see them online, your perception of their picture online might be better than it would have been without knowing them in person, and vice versa. Seeing a picture of a guy, oh, I'm not attracted to you, bye. But then you meet them in person, you're like, oh, actually, I find you kind of attractive. So I think there is some sort of gap that implies it's not just strictly physical looks. Like I think it's really important for people to vibe check in the flesh to the degree that they can based on whatever that situation is. Do I think height, face, and what was the other one? Physicality.
Yeah, like
I think they're objectively important. But what scenario do women deviate from those things being high priority? It's just the actual relational dynamic. Like I can have a preference for taller guys because I think as women we like the idea of like, you're bigger than I am, right? It makes us feel like women or in some way, like biologically. But I like short guys. So it's not, you know what I mean? And it was just maybe if I just saw a picture of you next to me in heels online, I would be like, but like then in real life, I was attracted to you. So, and then physicality is really important too, but I don't know. Unfortunately, I'm so nuanced with it and it's just very holistic to me. But I also think from secondhand experiences with women, it's true too, because there's almost like an ego element that you can appreciate, but also you can transcend it. It can just be one piece in it where it's like, oh, I'm going to kind of get over this element that is not ideal physically because of these other things.
Mm-hmm. And you think that most women can get over the physical element?
I don't know if I would say most women can get over the physical element. I think it depends on, this is a risky anecdote to think of. So I'm thinking of a couple where she's not really proud of what he looks like.
Mm-hmm.
And
he's good in bed.
I don't know. Actually, I don't know about their sex life, but I know that she really liked him, but there was some shame when we would talk about that situation. So that points to you asking me about, can women just get over it? I actually don't know if they're still together. I don't talk to her anymore.
Because I think what we're talking about here fundamentally is if you distill it as desire, right? Like what makes somebody desirable versus what makes, I always split attraction into desire and comfort because they have these two parts of attraction have different kind of inputs on it. And I can tell you, like, so for instance, from the perspective with a guy, a woman a woman's looks is the overwhelming part of desire. I mean, it just is. It's like how she looks is what makes a woman desirable for the most part. Aside from that, the only thing that a woman can really do to increase her desirability is you could say basically how she plays with her sexual energy, and of course whether she's good in bed. She can interact with you in a way that can kind of signal that. So it's not just like being good in bed, it's also the whole like, you know, being able to carry yourself in a sexy way. But that's like, and in situations where you have guys who are typically with a woman who, you know, they're not necessarily like there's these stories, and I think that I'm sure it happens in the same way with women too, where maybe not to the exact same extent, but where there's a guy, there's a girl who they don't want to like admit that they're seeing, but they're like seeing them all the time on the side because the sex is good, and they right. I mean,
so I think that ties back to, okay, well, this girl, we always go so many layers deep, but okay, a woman's relationship with her ego heavily involves what we would like prefer to be seen by other people as, right? So if you take into the fact that you are genuinely authentically attracted to somebody, but maybe from an external point of view, you want to be seen, and he's like, you know, you want to be seen with somebody who's tall and jacked and whatever, and he's not that, then that can get in the way of you owning that and taking pride in it. Whereas like your ego is getting in the way of authentic love and attraction, right? Because of your relationship with external validation and maybe fear of rejection, not within the romantic thing, but from outsiders.
Now, kind of related to that, I've heard, and I don't really know, I'll be honest, I don't know that I haven't seen this really, but it's just something I had heard a lot, that women don't like to be with guys who are more attractive than them because they want to be the ones who are attractive in the relationship. Maybe there's like a subset of girls who are like that, but I gotta be honest, I haven't seen that. I think that women
want to be with somebody more
maybe I could see like if a guy is very, very handsome, that maybe some girls get insecure about being with a guy who's so handsome, so they might sabotage it in some way.
Yeah, I think that would depend on, does the woman feel, even if the woman feels proud because he's more attractive than her, it will definitely, you know, in comparison, maybe poke at her insecurities around not being attractive enough for him. Mm-hmm. Right. But can that be something that she just sits, you know, okay with that vulnerability and feel safe enough within that dynamic to put up with it? Or does her ego be like, oh, I can't even, I'm always going to be attacking this because I'm like like the fact that I don't feel on the same level of him as attractiveness, or I'm not above him in attractiveness, then he's like the enemy because it's just always holding mirror up to my insecurities around how I look. Interesting. I don't actually, that's a really interesting question. I don't think I've ever asked like behind the scenes of Girl Talk in any way, like that would take a level of self-awareness too, right? Like, are you okay with him being more attractive than you?
And a willingness to even share that with other women too.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. Yeah.
So for guys, so I mean, I guess if you're a guy though, who like I would say that looks for a guy, it minimizes for sure, right, your chances of getting rejected. So if you're a guy who is shorter or who has like, you know, let's say a less attractive face, or, you know, you're not in the best of shape. I mean, I don't think there's any excuse for guys to be like fat, you know what I mean? But let's just say you're not in the best of shape, not in ideal shape. What do you like? So in order to like there's the whole idea of like the Napoleon complex, right? But what I've noticed,
the one where like you love your dad's archetype.
No. Napoleon complex is like, and I don't even know why they ascribe it to Napoleon, because I mean, I think that it's like an over exaggeration about how short he actually was, but it's the idea that like short guys are bigger assholes.
Middleman syndrome.
Yeah, exactly. But the thing is, like, I think it works. I think it compensates in some way. Like if you're a guy who's like really handsome, and you already have people who have like a buy-in with you, I think that your game, not to say you can't like tease and stuff, but your game almost wants to be more complimentary.
Yeah, and I agree with you that that's a positive compensation as long as you're not a piece of you're not an asshole, right? Nobody likes somebody, but it's just like you could make the parallel with a woman who's mid. I hate that term because I think it's so like used in the wrong scenarios in the internet world.
Yeah.
Say she's obviously loves herself and feels like she's a great catch. That's gonna feed to the vibe of you like being around her. It might make her more attractive. Right. So same thing with the guy. It's definitely not doing you any favors to feed into the fear that you're too short for somebody to love you or be attracted to you. And actually, it's not just a neutral thing. It's you are actively working against yourself if you're not knowing that, you know, what I'm thinking of a tweet one time where it's like, God knew that if he made me tall, like I would take all your women or something like that. It's funny because it's like you should on some level feel that way about yourself.
Yeah, you should.
It couldn't have been perfect, or I would have been just like crushing everybody. Like, but it's good. It's good to some degree because you're going to show up in a way that's like, oh, maybe I'm wrong about writing you off for your as a woman.
You actually create contrast because, and someone made this tweet the other day, and it's so true. Like I remember this actually from like a Matthew Hussey seminar. I was one of like 5 guys in a room of like 150, 200 women. And he did this thing where he showed like a guy who looked like a convict, you know, jack dude, had all these tattoos, and then it showed him like holding this baby and being really sweet. It's like, this is an attractive contrast for a woman because you have a guy who looks like he's like a killer, but then here he is being really soft and like good with a baby. Like it's hitting both sides of the coin, and you always want to be going for those contrasts. So if you are a shorter guy, like you can't be like you really can't be a nice guy. You can't be meek. Like if you're like handsome and jacked, like it's actually like being really like complimentary and gracious is going to make you more attractive because there's a contrast there. But it's the other way around. If you're like a short, like, you know, unimposing dude, you got to be almost like a little bit more of like an assertive dickhead to affect people's perception of you and how they're going to engage. And a lot of times it's like hammering that into them. Like you got to change your persona, man. You got to change the way you present yourself.
Yeah, mentally and emotionally, if you're going to just match what you view as your physical shortcoming with the way you, to circle back to rejection, the way you approach a woman at a bar, then you're just going to get in your own way and nuke any opportunity for somebody to be like, oh, actually, I shouldn't write you off because you're shorter than my ideal perfect person that I've drawn in my head. Right. Yeah.
You have to be prepared to challenge her preconceptions. Yeah. 100%.
And imagine like you are a great fit. Everybody I think on a deeper level wants the reasons that they get in their own way challenged. Because no matter what ways we get in our own ways, whether it's like, let's call it unjustified rejection. Everybody wants to be happy, right? Everybody wants to be fulfilled and love each other. And like, you know, and if there's a way for you to navigate that to where you can facilitate somebody's barriers, then, and both of you are happier for it, cool. That's great. It's positive sum.
So we got about 15 minutes left. I want to get to, because when we talk about rejection, guys are the ones, you know, guys are so solipsistic, right? They always think that they're the only ones who get rejected. And to be fair, yeah, you like that? But to be fair, they are, I guess for women, you know, the equivalent kind of rejection is it's a lower threshold in terms of what might cause it, but it doesn't mean that it doesn't feel any different for them. So I'm curious, like we were talking about like the handkerchief kind of thing. Like, so a woman who goes out to a bar and is sort of dropping some eye contact here and there, positioning herself maybe near a guy she's interested in, and the guy doesn't talk to her. Tell me, like, what is that experience like for women? How do women view those kind of things as rejection?
Yeah. And I think that the reason the male leaning perspective might view women as not dealing with rejection as much is because it doesn't happen the same for us as it does for you. In a generalized, broad sense, guys need to be the shooters, right? So you guys have to experience a lot more rejection than us. I could almost make a parallel between that and like somebody having, it almost feels like a relational like trust fund baby. Because women are beautiful and they just get to attract and be approached more than the guy dynamic, they think that rejection happened less, but that's not true. It just happens in a different way. So say, for example, a woman puts herself out there, whether it's through signaling as strangers or within a relationship or whatever it is, there's some vulnerability. There's so many opportunities for just straight up like approaching him or something like that and showing interest, and he's like doesn't feed into it. Women get rejected all the time. It just doesn't happen the same as it does for y'all, where we're like going out there and approaching a bunch of guys, unless you're like the hunter type woman. It's just a lack of, not to be cliche and corny, but it's a lack of compassion for just the different version of the same problem, right? Yeah. Even if, say, for example, like a long-term relationship and the guy's not there, right? Or say, let's take we've both worked with this type, like very busy entrepreneur, burnt out, building his online business, and then is struggling with being present at dinner with his kids and wife, and he's just not there. We could almost argue that that's a version of her feeling rejected because, like it's like, and I've made this reference on my interview with Jonathan. Do you ever seen The Breakup?
Oh my God, such a long time ago.
So the first scene is she's been slaving away in the kitchen all day, making dinner. They're having a bunch of family and friends over, some shit. He gets home from working all day. She asked him to bring him lemons. He brings her lemon. He kisses her, and he goes back, kicks his shoes off, lays on the couch, and he's chilling, watching football or some shit. And she comes in with the bag of lemons. She's fucking pissed because he doesn't get. First of all, she's bitching about the number of lemons that he got her because he's just a very explicit creature and he just got her one. But the real issue isn't that it was the number of lemons. It's that she didn't feel like he gets what she's going through, and they haven't been really close, and whatever it is. And I'm drawing this because it goes back to like she's being rejected in the house, in their household, in that story. He's not, they're not, I'm into you, I'm pursuing you, I'm dating you, I'm there for you, I'm validating you.
Pursued.
She feels rejected, so she is attacking.
Yeah. It's in the same way that guys get frustrated that their, longtime girlfriends or wives aren't like as eager and excited for them as they used to be, right? In the beginning, right? They aren't as receptive. It's the women have the inverse frustration, which is that they don't feel like their boyfriend or husband pursue them like they used to, right? And this is like the dying of polarity within a relationship. But you're totally right. It is felt as a rejection for them, and it's such a huge cause of miscommunication and issues. I mean, I've certainly been that guy. You know what I mean? Like 100%.
And we could argue that it's your, I think that really needs to be a collaborative thing, because we could argue it's his fault for not being aware of her emotions, or we could argue it's her fault for not being like, hey, like I don't feel very loved right now. Or maybe we could just say both parties just need to be aware of what's going on and decide if they want to do something to make it better, right? Because, it's just, I think when we fear rejection, whether it's in that dynamic or not, something is formed where it resonates with like what we're talking about, that fear. It's like fear that I'm not good enough, that I'm not worth fighting for, that I'm not attractive enough, that, we're just going to get complacent and bored, whatever it is. And there has to be some courage, whether it's both collaborative or one and then the other rising to that too, where it's like, oh, things are going to shift now. And kind of rise out of the internal fear of like, because the more you fear rejection, the more you're feeding into something that resonates inside of you where you kind of already rejected yourself, whether it's just the idea of being rejected and you're like resonating with that and then helping it actualize in your reality. Or, because if you always feel like you're going to be okay, you're probably going to fear that less and be like, hey, what's going on? This isn't good right now.
Yeah. I mean, this is one of the things that I always prefer. I know it sounds like kind of counterintuitive, but I always prefer to work with a guy who's having some fighting with his wife about issues rather than a guy who's just like quietly suffering. Because a guy who's fighting, like he's got like there's fire in him. Like, like he wants something and he might be going about it the wrong way and he might be in his ego, but this is somebody who really has a will to change. And it's just a matter of helping him to communicate that in a healthier manner. I'm not saying it's obviously not impossible. If a guy reaches out for coaching, like then he's already got some will to change anyway. But when a guy is really like quietly suffering, doesn't feel like he can bring anything up, doesn't, is afraid to do it, it's much harder to get this, because you almost have to like want it. You have to want it, and you have to want it enough to fight for it.
Why do you think, and I like that you like that, but I'm curious, why do you like that better?
Probably because I'm like that. Being honest, I mean, I think that there's some degree of projection with it,
and it resonates more as an axiom to like help them navigate through. I don't know if this stands out to you on your side, but what stands out to me there is if he's still having to battle relationally, conflicting wise, you at least know the baseline is he is confronting the issue, even if he's doing it poorly.
Yeah.
Versus just like sinking into this learned helplessness.
I mean, your life will rise to the level to which you demand more of it, and accordingly demand more of yourself. So if you're somebody who, I think to some extent, like I'm not saying it's the right direction to go in, but I think to some extent, like you're fighting with the woman you're with, you're even considering like leaving her because you're not getting what you want out of it. To some extent, like I like that, because I feel like it's energy. Like energy can be directed and molded. It's much harder to like generate energy in a guy who's like, I just don't feel like I can do anything. I don't feel like I can. It's like the same thing with a guy who's getting bad results with women, but he's going out every weekend and talking to women. Like, it's going to be easier to get changes in that guy's life because that guy is already out. Like, he just needs more. He needs more awareness, but there's less of that fear, right? There's less of the fear factor that we talked about earlier. There's less of the fear of rejection because he's voicing his opinion and he's getting rejected. Like, he's happy to like fucking blow things up. I mean, there's a point where it becomes toxic. Like, don't get me wrong. I'm not saying that it's like you just take it to an extreme. If you take it to an extreme, it can even become violent. Like, it's not. I'm not saying it's only it's purely a good thing, but I find that some degree of low scale kind of fighting and frustrations, like the balance is that it didn't go too far, that the dynamic is poisoned. But
I agree with you because I almost think it's pointing to a reason. Investing in self-starters or people who are trying in some way has so much more of a return on investment for helping them.
Yes.
Versus the person who's just like helpless and needs help, they might be more accustomed to be like, help me, but they're not trying to do anything about it in any way starting out with. So it's so much harder to catalyze them. Whereas somebody who's maybe doing all the wrong things, but at least they're trying, it's so much easier to help them take nonlinear jumps out of that because they are trying. And it's funny because the contradiction there too is they might be the last ones to want to ask you for help, right? These guys who are even, you could actually do more with them and turn them into a killer testimonial or whatever we would talk about from the coach perspective, but they're going to be less likely to ask for you for help because they are.
They often ask for help when things have become really pathological in the dynamic. Sometimes they ask for help when the woman is like really at the point of like taking advantage of them, where it's already gotten really bad, or the relationship has been so like, there hasn't been sex in ages. There's like people can wait way too long for this kind of stuff. I mean, look, anybody can change at any time, but there's just some things I observed. And I do think that there's something to be said also from the perspective of the woman, that women to some degree can feel that, again, so long as it doesn't get too toxic, because there's eventually like a burnout when it comes to trust. But I think that from a desire standpoint, a guy who shows some fire in him against her, even if he's not giving her like the attention and affection that she really wants, like, I don't know. I think that there's something, I think that to some extent, and correct me if I'm wrong here, honestly, correct me if I'm wrong, but there's to some extent, like a woman prefers it than a guy who just sort of rolls over.
100%. 100%. And I think that I've also taken the opposite stance on that, where I compensate it for it too much and it doesn't end up being attractive.
Yeah.
Right? Like there needs to be a level of, it's almost, I'm going to try to tie it back to rejection the next like 5-8 minutes or whatever. If you're a person who is less sensitive to fear of rejection, it means you've arrived at a place with yourself where that doesn't resonate as much. So if the guy is just a laydown and he's not trying, that's kind of pointing in that direction of like, listen, I'm great. and I'm going to give myself a shot because I am great. Right.
Yeah.
Like, and that's, and for somebody to act opposite to that, where they're not even giving themselves a shot, then, then there's more energy for us to resonate with rejecting you.
Yeah. Yep.
No matter where you are at on the timeline of the dynamic or whatever it is. I've tweeted this before, and I've said this to like hype people up when we're having those in part, and I meant it, but like, you can be the whole package at the wrong address.
Yeah, that's a great line.
Isn't it great? I've repeated it 500 times ever since I tweeted it like years ago at some point. Like when you just like dump out a good tweet and you're like, blah, blah, blah. But it's so true. And I'm not saying anyone is perfect, but if you do what you can to be if you're into self-development, like what we both are and the people we work with are, it's important to you to be a good person, to character develop, to get healthy, to build a life for yourself, to be a good in your relationships, to be good in your purpose, to whatever it is, and then it's okay to know that rejection doesn't mean that those things disappear.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
just because somebody rejected you.
Yeah, no, 100%. And I think to some extent also, like that pushing forward, that fearlessness to like constantly face rejection, you almost are spurring that with the person you're with too.
Yeah.
And you're making them have to face it as well. I think I can be exhausting to be with, because I'm blah, blah, blah. Because it's like, and I joke with my wife about this. I'm like, sorry, like, like I'm never gonna settle for like something average in the relationship. Like it's always gonna be pushing to the next level. I mean, I've had to modulate that like tactically, because you can't make it like a chore. You know what I mean? Like, and you can't, and there's a toxic side of that where you're actually just projecting your own anxiety and trying to make the other person change to deal with I've worked with a lot of clients who were like that with me, and I've had to like say, hey, this is your own bullshit. But the sort of setting the standard, like, this is the kind of thing that we want to have. How do we get there? Where we're at is great, but we can do better.
That's really important. Getting into things, I think, too, is and I've fumbled this before, is getting into it. One of my favorite best friends / mentors, married couples, one time they said to me, and I was opening up about one of my past dating experiences. They said something to me along the lines of, this is when I had a little bit more of my like savior complex wound, like playing out. Mm-hmm. And they said something along the lines of like, don't go in expecting, like, go in with clarity around what you can. You have to ask yourself like what you can and can't live with, and not expect the things that you don't like to change. In fact, you should probably maybe almost expect them to get worse, and ask yourself if that's something that you can see dealing with. And the reason I'm bringing that anecdote up is I'm not necessarily saying that as a black and white statement, but I'm saying is you have outlets for this you that you can be a lot to be with, right? And I can relate to that because I'm always going to be yapping, and I get a lot of fulfillment from talking to people about these solutions of clarity. And somebody who's deciding to be with me in any capacity, there needs to be a level of that is, that involves some risk, to where we have these other outlets, whether to conversation or content or or whatever it is, and that's, you found this person like this, and then you just are there are certain areas to decide what you can and can't work with, and how that I hate to put it so transactionally, but like almost like the return on investment of the bond, where this is an ideal, like, but I think we need the unideal elements of it to keep it like interesting.
Yeah.
Right? Because if there's no zero risk and it's full, everything is I think that also is like just get boring. And I'm so terrified, and I'm gonna be really candid for a second. I'm terrified of that. I'm so terrified of like a long-term thing ending up boring. And I think a really important element of that is risk tolerance. They've also highlighted like you can have different risk tolerance, but I think too much of a gap in risk tolerance can really break things, whether that's social risk tolerance or life real tolerance, or just respecting each other's risk tolerance, or whatever that is. And we could say rejection and social things are, something that you need to look for proximity within that.
Trina, that is really so profound. And it's something that I've never, you talk about values and stuff, but that's like a value in a certain sense. I mean, you could maybe classify it a little bit as a personality, but I think fundamentally it's a value because we choose really how much. You may have a personality that inclines you towards it, a spirit that inclines you towards it, but the degree to which you're willing to take risks is very, very much a way that you approach life. And you're totally right. Like there are, I maybe have like a little bit of a higher one when I think when it comes to my wife, but my wife is definitely a risk taker. I mean, she moved, she left her country when she was 18 years old. She went across the country to be with me. Like, she's certainly taken her fair share of risks. Like, I think a lot of women, I realize a lot of women wouldn't be able to do that. And there must have been some degree of matching in spirit there. And in the same course, guys who are lower risk tolerance themselves, it's one thing to be with a woman who's maybe slightly more risk prone. Risk prone isn't a good way to put it, but more like willing to take risks might be good because it might nudge them forward. And you always want to have like you don't want to be exactly there, but you want to have like a little bit of healthy tension. But you're right, it can't be too wide, because then it's not like you're just opposites attracting a little bit. It's actually like you are completely incompatible from a way of living. And I definitely have. I look back now. It's so interesting. I look back now, and I definitely rejected girls because they were unwilling to take risks that were attractive to would have attracted me to them more if they had taken them.
Yes.
Like, fly out to this place with me. Like, my wife, like, she was willing to fly out, go on a trip with me. Like I like barely knew her. It's like, all right.
Yeah, cool. and then the manosphere might be like, oh my gosh, she's willing to fly out to meet you, bro. It was like, da-da-da. But it's the proximity, not that. And you also pointed to the fact
she had
that
met me twice, and we were and we had mutual friends in common. So it wasn't like I was like some like random.
You weren't just a random.
It wasn't totally random. Like, we had already gone on a date. There had been. She definitely actually showed a lot of caution initially, but after we had been talking and everything, like, there was a certain point where she's like, I trust this guy, and now I'm not gonna let that hold me back anymore. When she felt that she could trust me, then she went and did it.
And you pointed to the fact that a difference in risk tolerance can also catalyze things that might otherwise have stayed dormant, right? Another very common couple archetype that I've witnessed many times is like, one is more like introverted, operational, analytical, and one is more like bold, extroverted, visionary. And that seems to be that cool yin and yang vibe. Sometimes it's not always like that, and it works really great. I'm not saying that's the only type that works, but it's nice because there can be more groundedness from one energy than the other person would typically have, and there can be more catalyzed and opportunity and experience because of the other one that might not have had. And I think if I'm going to get sexist for a second, this person is just texted that they're running late. Are you pushing my meeting aside, Pat? So they're in traffic. Just to tie this up, what was I going to say? Shit. Oh, to get sexist for a second, I think it's easier for men to have more risk tolerance than the woman. Mm-hmm. So that can be, somebody who's ballsy. Like, I got pretty big risk tolerance, right? So I can be seen as like red flags and stuff, but that's a challenge for me and women like me, right? Because dare I say, and not to validate like toxic women who are like, man up, and they're like, they're a liability to the man, but at least being in proximity in terms of balls, right? Otherwise it's going to be just inherently threatening. Because I've also dated people in the past that like, that was an issue.
Well, I think one of the issues, so one of the things, like, a guy can be with like a woman like you, for instance, that has a more like adventurous, higher risk tolerance thing, but he has to be willing to say yes, right? Like, I think that the problem is not necessarily that, like, you might be the one who comes up with the plan or the idea, and he might not like be the one developing it on his own, but he has to be willing to like go where you go for the most part. And that, I think, is a lot of the challenge, is that what you have is guys who are really like stick in the muds, and they're like, I'm not going to do it. I'm not going to do this. And you know what I mean? Like, I don't think you necessarily need a guy who's going to be even more adventurous than you. You just need somebody who's willing to go along with you on the journey. Yes. And,
which can be triggering.
But this, yeah. And I think that some guys, and this is when you can get a little bit too, you can almost like lose the forest for the trees when it comes to, gender dynamics. Because they might say, well, she wants to do this, so I'm not going to do it because she's always trying to lead. But actually what they're showing is that they're a pussy. Like, they're not like, it's like, I'm leading, by doing nothing. You know, it's like you're not leading. You
And
know?
if they don't own that within themselves, then it can just be almost like when I said, I'm going to draw a weird parallel here. Remember when I said women can reject you for reasons that aren't your height, but they might feel like, oh, it's because you're short. I think for the man, it can be, oh, I think that she is, leading the thing. But if they're not being honest with themselves, it's really just that you don't have the balls to, hop in on the adventure and have room to take up and step the lead too, because it's holding a mirror up to somewhere that you maybe identified as like wanting to, travel the world, and then you want to, or build a business or get jacked or whatever your ambition was. And then when you actually had the opportunity to step up and get what you always thought you wanted, but you had all these excuses for not getting, it's like, oh, wow, I actually just don't have any balls right now.
Yeah. Yep. No, I think this was great.
We got really far away from rejection, I feel like, but in my brain, we were touching on it the whole time. You know what I mean?
Well, I think, yeah. And just to maybe tie this up for people so they understand the connection to it, the meta here is about fear and risk tolerance. Like rejection is something that you face. You're going to face more rejection, but when you have a higher risk tolerance. But the flip side is that facing that rejection is going to get you more of what you want in life, and you're going to become stronger and more resilient through the process.
I remember your tweet that I responded to it, and I was like, this resonates so hard. And it almost reminds me of fear of rejection. Is like you said, it's, and I have this too, it's a risk to be friends with me because I'm so outspoken.
Yeah.
You said something along those lines. I love that tweet. And almost that's like, facing a fear of rejection relationally, not outside of romantic context too. It transcends to everything because there's more risk to you needing to express certain things in terms of how that can impact the people who are tied up to you in some way. But also the connections that you do form and the people who are willing to get you to that degree to where that's okay. They're more fulfilling.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, and it is really, I think that the big takeaway for people here is that, anyone who talks about like authenticity, like you want to get what you want out of life, you want to express yourself fully in life or be fully expressed. There is the path to that is infinite rejection. In order to become the most distilled version of yourself, you must face like infinite level rejection. And that's the course of your entire life is the degree to which you can be rejected at that next level. And there's no, you have, I'm not saying people have to go that route, but you can't lie to yourself about what it takes. You can't say, I want someone who's going to accept me for me, and then you refuse to put yourself out there. No one is going to accept you for you. You have zero expression of yourself. You're a bland nothing. Just being blunt, you're nothing because you won't put yourself out there.
You almost are flipping fear of rejection on its head there, because in my brain, because when you fear rejection, you almost are avoiding taking up space, right? And I think you just made it almost sound like it's more arrogant to think that everything should work out for you when you've shot your shot 9 times on the 9th failure. Now I deserve to win.
Yeah,
I deserve to be accepted versus rejected. When it's like a little bit more arrogant to think that you should land all the shots that you take in life, no matter what domain we're talking about. It's a little bit more arrogant to believe that.
Yeah, and a lot of this gets into the focus on external validation. Like, look, everybody wants to be accepted, okay? Yeah. Like, we're not getting into some sort of like absurd position here. It's like, I don't care about everybody cares about that. But what is directing your action? Like, I really wanted to be accepted by people. I really wanted to be a well-liked person. And I had a huge social group. I had hundreds of friends. Threw parties, easily, I say this a lot. I threw a birthday party, I had 300 people show up, like, and I burned all of that because I went, down supporting Trump. Like that's really what it was. It was like I had a Faustian bargain here. I could remain the super well-liked person who was somehow violating internally held principles in what I felt like was the truth, or I could go down that path and accept the cost for what they were. I've always taken that path. Like, I'm not going to, even though I really was into the validation, I wasn't going to give up what was true for it. But because I had become so attached to the validation, it hurt more because that showed how many friends I had brought into my life that were built on the wrong things. I'm getting so much better about that over time. I don't try to do like the bird with the broken wing stuff anymore. Try to help people who are real, like you said yourself. You may have gone through something similar, like savior related things. Like now I start to sniff it out in people, like this guy's envious. He's not going to, I can't trust him. You know,
the underbelly of our power, right? Because we love our purpose. Both of our purposes have to do with helping people. So the underbelly of that is taking it to the point of savior, I think.
Yeah.
Right. And I faced a lot of rejection during the pandemic too. And I still have some of those friendships that were long-term have survived with conflicting beliefs. And I've addressed it with a couple of them. Like one of my longest friendship, period. My longest friendship. We've been friends since we were 3 years old. Almost 3 decades. And we are on, you know, I personally feel politically homeless, but I think people identify me as conservative, whatever. And I think you could say I am, you know, conservative. Like, whatever.
Because you're open-minded, you know what I mean?
Yeah. It causes a really conflict for them, not for me. I don't know if this is controversial to say, but because they know my heart. So then these cruel, air quotes, opinions I might have, it's hard for them to reconcile that I have that and they know my heart. Yeah. So some of the ones that have transcended the political opposition with each other, it's like they can't get away from the fact that they know that I'm love people. And I you know, whatever I think, even if they disagree with it, has people's best interest in heart. And I get where they're coming from in certain elements, and I'm all like nuance, blah, blah, whatever. But you know, and it's a perspective of not lacking compassion, right? Because we also experienced pain, even if we were the ones who seemed like we were like oh, screw everybody, I'm going to take this stance. We faced a lot of rejection for just being true to what our opinions were.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, and this is, it's every rejection frees you more and more. I think that's what, so long as you view it from the standpoint of like, I'm going to be true to myself, and I have to be true to myself. It doesn't matter what the costs are. I'm going to be true to myself. You're going to go through the crucible. It's going to hurt. And, you know, you might not only be one, there's different layers to the shedding, but you become more and more free over time. Whereas if you are completely, if you are not trying to anchor onto your own identity and your own path and your own, then rejection is just like, you're almost going in circles. You know what I mean? Like you're not going to get anywhere with it. And no wonder people are afraid of it. If you're addicted to validation and that is your only organizing principle, then anything that is rejection oriented is just going to hurt for you. And so you almost just want to become bland and nothing. And look, that's fine. You can do that. But I don't want to hear that you want to be fucking authentic, because you're not fucking authentic. You are.
Some people who are always preaching online and telling on themselves, I don't care what people think, I'm going to do what I want. It's like, well, clearly you care what people think, because, you know, if you're okay with rejection, you don't need the validation, and you can't accept that we all like a level of validation, we want to be liked and accepted, then you're probably leaving a lot of opportunity costs on the table in your experience of life.
Yeah. It's just, you know, you got to be okay with the pain. But if you're okay with the pain, it does get better over time. And I mean, I look back at my life when I was afraid of everything, and you're just more miserable on a baseline level too, because you can't internally regulate. Like my mental health has got, like, I still have anxiety, but my anxiety is very like, oh, there's a thing I'm supposed to be doing. I haven't been doing it. I do that thing, the anxiety goes away. Like I've now view like the anxiety as just a superpower when it comes to productivity, because as long as I feel like I'm actually executing, I'm fine. I don't even have to get everything done. As long as I feel like I'm actually executing in good faith. If I feel like I'm off balance, off point, then like if it's almost like the anxiety is directly proportional to the amount of lies in my life.
Yeah. I think anxiety is like when we're avoiding feeling what is actually a feeling that's there, or avoiding what needs to be done, or avoiding what needs to be said, then the anxiety happens. And the only way to do that is to feel like you are doing or trying or saying what causes that anxiety.
This is a really interesting question to be continued, but is anxiety fundamentally that in people, that people who have high levels of anxiety maybe have a higher sensitivity to truth in falsehood, but they are maybe for various reasons they're ignoring it. I don't know. Maybe they're more sensitive to things, to like the calibration of things. But if they're ignoring it because they're too afraid, or because they have too much BS in their head that's messing with their first principles and ability.
We should explore that, because we've both had past arcs where people probably can't imagine that because we're socially very efficient. Right? Like I think I don't know. I know that I come off comfortable with myself because I am, and I wasn't always like this.
Yeah. And
so I think we should talk about that, because everybody's so anxious, and a lot of people are really good at disguising it.
Yeah, and I think it's also notable that the people who are, not to make it too political or anything, but the people who are like really on the far left are like, you're seeing the data with it, like they're diagnosed with significant numbers of mental disorders, and there's a decoupling from reality that's occurring. So like, of course you're gonna have tons and tons of anxiety, like you're gonna be on anti-anxiety. So I think that there's something to it. I wonder about this. I wonder about it because I don't like I said, I don't view it as a negative anymore. I view it as like
a signal.
Yeah, it's exactly right. It's a signal. It's a signal, and because I don't just get. It's very, very, really rare that I get some sort of baseline, or almost like I can separate the moments when I get like an anxiety that's more like based on a delusional fear. That stuff is old, versus when the sort of standard anxiety is what we were just talking about. Like, yeah, you haven't done this.
I think those are related, because I think when we're avoiding something, the thought of it makes us anxious. So we're trying to protect ourselves by avoiding it. And the only cure is some level of exposure to it that ends up safe or good.
Yes. And that's a good thing to end on too, because exposure therapy, I didn't even really know it was a thing. Like, it was a technical, I guess I knew it was a thing, but I never like have thought about it as like a psychological field versus like other stuff like cognitive behavioral therapy, etc. I really think exposure therapy is where it's at.
I need to read more. I'm very not, it might come off like I'm well read, but I'm not. I just think that everybody who takes these kinds of journeys lands in similar conclusions.
Yeah.
And, exposing thing, I do have to jump for a call. Yeah. But actually, maybe we should talk about anxiety on the next episode.
Next episode, anxiety.
Everybody's gonna be like, I don't want to watch this one. I'm anxious.
I'm anxious for the next show. Trina, thank you as always for coming on, and we'll see you next time.
See you next
time. Podcast.
Always a pleasure.
All right, I'll see you.
Bye.